And now, almost 11 years after a British company was launched, what is likely to be the final stage, the final search for the doomed aircraft.
On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished with 239 people on board. For more than a decade, experts searched the ocean. Over $200 million were spent scanning the seafloor. Families waited, and slowly, the world came to accept that MH370 might remain one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries. But now, a retired British engineer named Richard Godfrey believes MH370 didn't vanish completely. He says the aircraft left behind a detectable trail, one subtle enough to be missed, but consistent enough to matter. And here's the most surprising part. If his method is correct, it may not only point to where MH370 went down, it could offer a new way to locate other missing aircraft that were once thought lost forever. So what exactly did he find? And are we closer than ever to the truth? Let's dive in. The vanishing night. Before we go deeper, let's clearly understand what MH370 really was. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 was a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people, including passengers and crew. It was flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The date was March 8, 2014. For the aviation world, it should have been a routine overnight flight, but it turned into the greatest mystery in modern aviation history. The plane took off from Kuala Lumpur at 12:41 a.m. Everything looked normal at first. The aircraft climbed smoothly. Pilots talked calmly with air traffic control. Nothing sounded wrong. For the first half hour, MH370 was just another dot in the sky. Then came the last words from the cockpit. At 1:19 a.m., the Malaysian air traffic controller told the plane to contact Vietnam as it crossed into the new airspace. The pilot replied in a calm, routine tone, "Good night, Malaysian 370. That was it. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder was switched off. This device tells civilian radar who the plane is, how high it is, and how fast it is flying. Suddenly, MH370 vanished from civilian radar, but the plane was still flying. Malaysian military radar, which works differently, picked up an unidentified blip. Investigators later confirmed that this blip was almost certainly MH370. The radar showed something shocking. The plane made a sharp left turn. It was not an accident nor a drift. It was a controlled turn. Instead of heading northeast toward Beijing, MH370 turned west, crossed the Malay Peninsula, flew past Penang Island, and continued toward the Andaman Sea. Military radar tracked it until 2:22 a.m., when it disappeared from their screens. Even then, the plane was still flying. Somewhere over the Indian Ocean, its satellite system turned back on and connected to an Inmarsat satellite. There were no emergency calls and no signs of trouble. Instead, the plane sent simple automatic signals called handshakes. There were 7 of them, sent over 6 hours. In the end, those quiet signals, often called ghost pings, were the only clues investigators had. At 8:19 a.m., the final signal arrived. According to the math, MH370 likely ran out of fuel somewhere along what became known as the 7th Arc in the southern Indian Ocean. And with that, began the most extensive search in aviation history to find out where the plane really went. But even after years of effort, not a single piece related to the plane was ever found. It looked like the plane had disappeared out of thin air without any answers. The broken story. After MH370 vanished, one explanation slowly became the official story. Investigators, media outlets, and many experts settled on a single idea. They believed the pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, deliberately diverted the plane. According to this theory, he turned off the communication systems, made a sharp turn across Malaysia, and flew the Boeing 777 south for almost 7 hours until it ran out of fuel and crashed into the southern Indian Ocean. At first, this story seemed to explain everything, but when people looked closer, things didn't seem to make sense. The biggest problem came from the satellite data. MH370 final handshake with the Inmarsat satellite happened at 8:19 a.m. Engineers studied something called the burst frequency offset, or BFO. These numbers suggested the aircraft was not gliding gently toward the ocean. Instead, they pointed to a very steep descent. In 2016, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau said the plane may have been dropping at up to 15,000 feet per minute. That is not a controlled landing. That is a violent fall. Then there was the wreckage. In July 2015, a flaperon washed up on Réunion Island. More pieces later appeared in Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, Mauritius, and South Africa. Experts noticed something strange. The flaperon showed flutter damage, meaning it shook violently at high speed. The flaps were also retracted, which is normal for cruising, not landing. Other fragments showed signs of extreme force as well. Finally, there was the search itself. Over $200 million were spent searching more than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed. The entire effort depended on assumptions and the belief that the seventh arc was the exact place where the plane might have gone missing. But year after year, nothing was ever found. So people began to doubt whether the official story was true at all. The invisible footprints. That question is what led Richard Godfrey into the story. Richard Godfrey wasn't a government investigator. He wasn't part of the official search teams. He wasn't even in aviation. He was a retired British aerospace engineer. But he had spent his whole career solving engineering problems, and MH370 became the one question he could not ignore. Instead of focusing on radar or satellites, Godfrey asked something very different. What if MH370 left traces that nobody was looking for? That thought led him to an obscure system called WSPR, the Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. WSPR wasn't built to track airplanes. It wasn't military. It wasn't classified. It was created in the 2000s by amateur radio hobbyists. Around the world, thousands of hobbyists send extremely weak radio signals, sometimes as little as 1 watt, between stations. These signals bounce off the ionosphere and travel across continents and oceans. Every transmission, every path, every tiny fluctuation, all of it is logged in a public database known as WSPRnet. Godfrey realized something important. If a large aircraft like a Boeing 777 flew through these weak radio paths, it could disturb the signals. The change might be tiny, just a slight dip or shift, but it would be recorded. So he started digging into the data. Over 3 years, Godfrey analyzed more than 200 billion data points from WSPRnet. He filtered out solar storms, noise, and background interference, and slowly, a pattern began to appear. On the night between March 7th and March 8th, 2014, Godfrey found roughly 130 WSPR disturbances across the Indian Ocean. When he plotted them in time order, they formed a path. The path began near the last military radar position of MH370. It then curved southwest and turned south. The trail ended at one precise location, 29.128 degrees south, 99.934 degrees east. This spot is about 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia, and outside any previous search zone. For the first time in years, MH370 wasn't a broad satellite arc. It wasn't a drifting probability zone. It was a dot, a precise location in the middle of the ocean. But could invisible radio signals really be trusted with something this serious? The final proof. When Richard Godfrey shared his findings, many people pushed back. Critics said WSPR was never designed to track airplanes. That was true. WSPR was made for amateur radio hobbyists, not crash investigations. But the physics behind it was real. Radio waves can be disturbed by large objects, and that part is not debated. Even Joe Taylor, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who invented WSPR, confirmed that aircraft can disturb these signals. The question was never if it could happen. The question was whether it could be precise enough. Godfrey knew numbers alone were not sufficient, so he looked for independent checks. He took his data to the University of Liverpool. The team there had experience with major aviation cases, including Air France Flight 447 in 2011. They tested Godfrey's results using Bayesian analysis. The outcome was striking. Their models showed a 74% probability that MH370's wreckage lies within a small area centered on Godfrey's coordinates. Then came another check. Godfrey compared the timing of his WSPR disturbances with the Inmarsat satellite pings. Every one of the 130 disturbances is lined up within about 4 minutes of the known satellite timeline. No other aircraft could explain the signals. MH370 was the only match. There was more. Oceanographers studied debris drift. Scientists at the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Germany ran simulations based on ocean currents. When they traced debris found on Reunion Island, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania backward, many paths led to the exact location at 29 degrees south. Finally, action followed evidence. In January 2025, Malaysia's Transport Minister, Anthony Loh, approved a new search. Ocean Infinity signed a no-find, no-fee contract, risking around $70 million. The target area is a 15,000 square kilometer box based on the WSPR analysis. This time, the search is not driven by hope, but by data, which means we may very well be standing at the edge of finally finding MH370. This time. For more than a decade, we didn't really know where MH730 ended up. Now, for the first time, science is pointing to one small, specific place in the vast Indian Ocean. And if that place holds the answers, we may finally uncover the truth the world has been waiting for. So, what do you think really happened to MH730? Drop your thought in the comments below. If you found this video fascinating, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we'll be uploading more incredible stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see ya.